to call the game warden, and then Sarah went out and got these. And there was another cub. It was killed by the dogs, but the guy was good enough to call somebody that knew how to handle them.
Behind the glimmering lights of Hollywood, where applause and prestigious awards seem to be the ultimate destination, there remain scars that never heal. Lee Marvin, the rugged, stoic face of American cinema, a man the world remembers for his intense, powerful roles, yet few know that his life was more dramatic and tragic than any film ever made. From the harrowing days of combat during World War II to scandals, heartbreaks in love, and the shadows he faced behind the scenes, Lee Marvin's story is not just the journey of a movie star, but a bitter reminder that fame does not always come hand in hand with happiness. So, what truly happened in the life of this legendary man? Born in 1924 in New York City, Marvin's earliest years were anything but smooth. Long before his name became etched into the fabric of Hollywood history, he struggled with the challenges of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and dyslexia, conditions rarely understood or even acknowledged at the time. Teachers branded him as troublesome, schools expelled him for disruptive behavior, and his family often faced the exhausting consequences of his restless energy. But Marvin was not a child content with confinement. He found solace and an unshakable sense of freedom in the outdoors, drawn instinctively to the woods, rivers, and fields. Hunting and exploring became not merely hobbies, but a lifeline, an escape from the rigid structures that seemed determined to reject him. This restless spirit would soon be tested in the crucible of real war. In 1942, as the United States plunged headlong into World War II, the 18-year-old Marvin enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps. Unlike many of his contemporaries who drifted into service reluctantly, Marvin embraced the call with a sense of inevitability. His raw energy, once a liability in classrooms, became an asset in the unforgiving environment of military training. The boy who could not sit still found his place in the ranks of disciplined Marines. But war, of course, was no adventure. Marvin was thrust into the Pacific Theater, one of the most brutal stages of the conflict. He saw combat in some of the bloodiest campaigns, including the pivotal Battle of Saipan in 1944. There, amid chaos and unimaginable carnage, his life changed forever. Shot in the back during ferocious fighting, Marvin suffered a near-fatal wound that left him hospitalized for over a year. He was awarded the Purple Heart and other commendations for his bravery, but the scars of war ran deeper than any medal could signify. It was in this crucible of fire and suffering that Lee Marvin was forged into the man the world would later come to know. The battlefield instilled in him a steel-hard discipline, a matter-of-fact toughness, and an uncompromising sense of realism. These were not mere traits but survival tools, carried from Saipan's beaches to the sound stages of Hollywood. When he eventually transitioned into acting, Marvin did not need to play a soldier, a mercenary, or a loner. He was those men. His performances rang true not because of technique alone, but because of lived experience written into his very bones. In this way, Marvin's turbulent childhood and violent baptism in war shaped the persona that captivated audiences for decades. His authenticity could not be fabricated. It was the product of hardship, scars, and survival. The little boy who could not follow the rules became the man who rewrote them in Hollywood. He carved out a niche for himself not as a polished matinee idol, but as a rugged icon of masculinity. Complex, unpredictable, and entirely his own. When Lee Marvin returned from the war, his life seemed destined for anonymity. A decorated Marine now living in relative obscurity, he picked up work as a plumber's apprentice in Woodstock, New York. The young veteran, still bearing the pain of his Saipan wound, had no plans for stardom, no great ambition beyond earning an honest living. Yet fate has a way of intervening in unexpected places. One evening, while working backstage at a small local theater, Marvin was asked to step in for an absent actor. The moment he walked under the stage lights, something shifted. The raw presence that had once unsettled teachers and officers now commanded attention in an entirely new way. That accidental debut opened a door Marvin had never thought to knock on. With the support of the GI Bill, a government program that enabled returning servicemen to pursue higher education, he began studying acting seriously. Training in New York's demanding theater scene, Marvin was not polished in the traditional sense, but his authenticity and brooding physicality gave him a distinctive edge. Casting directors quickly noticed that he carried with him an aura few could imitate, the look of a man who had seen violence firsthand and survived it. In the early 1950s, Marvin began landing small film and television roles. His characters were often soldiers, tough cops, or menacing villains, archetypes that seemed almost tailor-made for his background. But it was in 1953 that his career took a dramatic leap forward. Cast as Vince Stone, a sadistic henchman in Fritz Lang's The Big Heat, Marvin delivered a performance that was both terrifying and magnetic. In one unforgettable scene, he casually throws scalding coffee into Gloria Graham's face. A moment so shocking it became iconic in film noir history. Hollywood had found its new tough guy. From there, Marvin's star began to rise. He played the leather-clad motorcycle gang leader Chino in The Wild One, 1953, opposite Marlon Brando. Though Brando stole the headlines, Marvin's feral energy made a lasting impression, cementing his reputation as Hollywood's go-to heavy. Throughout the 1950s, he built a career as a dependable character actor, often portraying villains whose menace was offset by an undercurrent of vulnerability. Television further propelled him into the public eye. From 1957 to 1960, Marvin starred in the gritty police drama M Squad, a series that showcased his charisma and intensity on a weekly basis. For 3 seasons, audiences tuned in to watch Marvin's hard-nosed detective tackle Chicago's criminal underworld. While the series did not elevate him to household name status just yet, it kept him in steady work and gave him a platform to refine his screen persona. Then came 1965, the year everything changed. Cast in Cat Ballou, a quirky Western comedy alongside Jane Fonda, Marvin took on a dual role: the drunken, washed-up gunfighter Kid Shalene and his cold-blooded twin brother Tim Strawn. The performance was a revelation. Marvin, previously typecast as brutal villains, displayed impeccable comedic timing, turning a caricature of machismo into something both hilarious and strangely poignant. The Academy took notice. Marvin won the Oscar for Best Actor, delivering a famously tongue-in-cheek acceptance speech in which he quipped that much of the credit belonged to his horse co-star, who had stolen more than a few laughs in the film. With that win, Marvin ascended to the ranks of Hollywood's elite. No longer just a supporting heavy, he became a bona fide leading man. In 1966, he starred in The Professionals, a rousing adventure film that paired him with Burt Lancaster and Robert Ryan. The following year, he headlined one of the decade's most celebrated war films, The Dirty Dozen, 1967. As Major John Reisman, Marvin commanded a ragtag group of convicts on a suicide mission, bringing to the role the authority of a man who had actually served in combat. Audiences and critics alike were captivated. That same year, he delivered another career-defining performance in John Borman's Point Blank, a stylized crime thriller that would go on to influence generations of filmmakers. By the late 1960s, Lee Marvin was not just a star. He was a symbol of a changing Hollywood. His characters were not glamorous or idealized. They were rough-edged, morally ambiguous, and grounded in reality. He represented a new kind of masculinity, one that resonated with audiences living through turbulent times, marked by social upheaval and the Vietnam War. The 1970s and 1980s brought mixed fortunes. Marvin remained a respected actor, though the roles became less consistent. Still, he delivered memorable turns in films like Emperor of the North, 1973, where he played a ruthless train conductor locked in a battle of wills with a hobo played by Ernest Borgnine. He brought gravitas to Samuel Fuller's semi-autobiographical war epic, The Big Red One, 1980, portraying a weary sergeant leading his men through the horrors of World War II. And in Gorky Park, 1983, Marvin lent his presence to a Cold War thriller set in the Soviet Union, showing that even in his later years, he could dominate the screen with a single glance. While his career slowed in the final decade of his life, Marvin never lost the qualities that made him unique: authenticity, unpredictability, and an uncompromising dedication to truth in performance. Whether playing a hero, villain, or something in between, He brought with him the weight of experience that audiences could sense, even if they did not know the full story. If Lee Marvin's on-screen life was marked by intensity and turbulence, his private life was no less dramatic. Behind the rugged Hollywood image, Marvin struggled with relationships, fame, and the challenge of reconciling his war-hardened personality with the quieter demands of domestic life. In 1951, Marvin married Betty Ebeling, a woman who would share with him the earliest, most formative years of his rise to stardom. Together, they had 4 children, and for a time, Marvin seemed to find balance in family life. But as his career accelerated through the 1950s and into the 1960s, the strain of long working hours, frequent travel, and the unpredictable lifestyle of a movie star began to take its toll. The marriage, though built on genuine affection, could not withstand the pressures of fame and Marvin's own personal demons. After years of tension, the couple divorced, leaving Marvin to navigate single life at the very height of his Hollywood success. It was in the aftermath of that divorce that Marvin entered into what would become one of the most publicized and controversial relationships of his era. In the 1960s, he began a long-term partnership with actress Michelle Triola. Their romance, which lasted 6 years, might have faded quietly into history if not for the legal battle that followed their breakup. In 1971, Triola filed a lawsuit against Marvin in what became famously known as the Palimony case. She claimed that, though they had never married, she had given up her own career to support Marvin, and therefore deserved a share of his wealth as though they had been husband and wife. The case electrified the media. Palimony was a term virtually unknown at the time, but Triola's lawsuit catapulted it into the public lexicon. For months, Marvin found himself in a spotlight far different from the one he was accustomed to on film sets. Tabloids feasted on the spectacle, painting the actor alternately as a heartless playboy or as a victim of opportunism. In court, Triola's claims were dissected in painstaking detail. Ultimately, the California Supreme Court recognized the possibility of such claims in principle, but Triola herself lost her case, receiving nothing from Marvin's fortune. Although Marvin emerged legally victorious, the ordeal took its toll. The trial exposed intimate details of his private life to the world, something Marvin had always tried to avoid. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he was not drawn to the glittering social circles of Hollywood. He was famously private, preferring the company of crew members, old war buddies, or working-class friends over red carpet soirees. He disliked the politics of stardom and often appeared ill at ease in the Hollywood machine, even as he thrived professionally within it. In 1970, amid the chaos of his legal troubles with Triola, Marvin found a steadier kind of love. He married Pamela Fee, a woman who brought stability to his turbulent personal world. Unlike his first marriage, which had been shadowed by the demands of his rising career, Marvin's union with Pamela coincided with a period of relative calm. Though his career in the 1970s and 1980s had highs and lows, at home he found something he had often lacked: consistency. The couple remained together until Marvin's death in 1987, a testament to a quieter, more enduring bond that contrasted sharply with the fiery spectacle of his earlier relationships. Still, Marvin remained a man of contradictions. Despite his fame, he cultivated an aura of detachment from the Hollywood scene. He was known to avoid parties and premieres whenever possible, often vanishing to his home in Arizona or to remote fishing trips. Friends described him as gruff but warm, someone who was most comfortable swapping stories with grips, carpenters, and sound technicians rather than mingling with studio executives or glamorous starlets. In many ways, Marvin never shed the Marine ethos: straightforward, skeptical of authority, and suspicious of unnecessary ceremony. His personality was shaped by war, hardship, and an instinctive distrust of pretense. Yet beneath the tough exterior, those close to him often saw a surprisingly gentle man, one who loved telling jokes, enjoyed a stiff drink, and cherished the rare moments of quiet away from the limelight. He was not one to broadcast his feelings, but his loyalty to his family and close friends ran deep. Yet for all the glory, accolades, and unforgettable performances, Lee Marvin's life carried a shadow that few outside his closest circle fully understood. Behind the camera, beyond the applause, he wrestled with a demon that had first taken root during his time in the Pacific: alcohol. For Marvin, drinking was not simply a pastime or a social ritual, it was a refuge, a salve for the memories he carried from Saipan and other brutal campaigns. Like many veterans of World War II, he rarely spoke openly about the horrors he had witnessed. Instead, he drowned them in whiskey, using the bottle as a shield against nightmares that returned with relentless force. The alcohol numbed him, but it also consumed him. On film sets, his reputation for hard drinking was as notorious as his performances were celebrated. Co-stars and directors often described him as unpredictable, brilliant and magnetic when sober, but erratic and difficult when in the grip of a bender. There were stories of production delays caused by his inability to show up on time, of entire scenes that had to be reshot because Marvin slurred his lines or collapsed midway through filming. In some cases, the very same intensity that made him compelling on screen was fueled by the lingering haze of alcohol. Still, Hollywood tolerated his flaws because his talent was undeniable. When Marvin was at his best, few could match him. His portrayal of raw, broken men seemed less like acting and more like revelation, an unfiltered glimpse into the psyche of someone who had seen both the best and worst of humanity. It was this edge, sharpened by his personal struggles, that gave his performances their haunting truth. But the years of drinking took their toll. By the 1970s, Marvin's health began to deteriorate. He developed chronic lung problems, a condition worsened by his chain smoking, and his heart grew weaker with time. Friends noticed he moved more slowly, his once powerful frame now carrying the visible weight of decades of excess. Even so, he refused to abandon his lifestyle, insisting that a man should live on his own terms, whatever the cost. On August 29, 1987, Lee Marvin's remarkable journey came to its inevitable end. At just 63 years old, he succumbed to a heart attack in Tucson, Arizona, after years of health complications linked to alcohol and cardiovascular disease. The news struck Hollywood like a cold shockwave. Tributes poured in from colleagues, critics, and fans who had admired his work. Yet those closest to him understood that Marvin had always lived on borrowed time. His body weakened long before his spirit ever faltered. Perhaps the most poignant chapter of his story is not found in his films, but in his final resting place. Marvin was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery, among rows of white gravestones marking the sacrifices of America's servicemen and women. His headstone bears no mention of his Academy Award, his iconic roles, or his decades-long career in film. Instead, it reads simply, Lee Marvin, PFC, U.S. Marine Corps, World War II, Purple Heart. That choice was no accident. To Marvin, for all the fame and acclaim he earned in Hollywood, he was first and foremost a Marine. The battlefield had defined him in ways the silver screen never could. He carried the scars of combat, both visible and invisible, for the rest of his life. And in death, he chose to be remembered not as an actor, but as a soldier. It is a sobering reminder of the complexity of his legacy. Marvin lived two lives. One as the larger-than-life figure who electrified audiences with his raw power, and another as a wounded veteran who never fully escaped the shadows of war. His struggles with alcohol, his mercurial temperament, and his declining health were all part of that same story. A story of survival, resilience, and the cost of carrying trauma too heavy for words. The story of Lee Marvin is not a simple narrative of triumph or tragedy. It is, instead, a tapestry woven with contradictions, light and darkness, heroism and self-destruction, discipline and chaos. He was a Marine who carried the scars of war into every room he entered. He was an actor who transformed those scars into unforgettable performances. He was a husband, a father, a lover, and a man haunted by demons that neither fame nor fortune could ever silence. What makes Marvin's life so compelling is not just the films he left behind, but the humanity within them. When audiences watched him stride across the screen, whether as a hard-edged officer in The Dirty Dozen or as the weary outlaw in Cat Ballou, they weren't just seeing an actor. They were seeing a man who had lived those battles, who had endured loss, and who had confronted mortality long before the cameras rolled. Marvin's characters felt authentic because they were rooted in his own experiences. Every gravelly line, every weary glance, every sudden flash of violence carried the weight of truth. And yet, his life also reminds us that even those who seem unbreakable are vulnerable. The same man who commanded attention with a single look was also undone by his dependence on alcohol. The same war hero who survived Saipan could not escape the slow decay of his own health. His death at just 63 years old is a sobering testament to the fragility of greatness. Perhaps that is why his gravestone at Arlington carries such power. By rejecting Hollywood's glittering epitaphs in favor of a simple military inscription, Marvin left behind a message more profound than any film role could convey. At the end of it all, what remains is not the applause, nor the awards, nor even the fame. What remains is who you truly are and what you chose to stand for. For Marvin, that was service, sacrifice, and loyalty to his brothers in arms. His story also forces us to ask larger questions about the cost of celebrity and the weight of trauma. How many stars like Marvin carry invisible burdens behind the mask of stardom? How often do we, as audiences, consume the image without acknowledging the person beneath? Marvin's journey is both a celebration and a cautionary tale, a reminder that greatness often comes at a price, and that the spotlight can illuminate as much as it obscures. So, how should we remember Lee Marvin? As the Hollywood rebel who broke the mold of the conventional leading man? As the Oscar-winning actor who carved unforgettable characters into cinema history? Or as the Marine whose courage and sacrifice defined his life more than any film ever could? The truth, perhaps, is that he was all of these things at once. A man whose contradictions made him human, and whose humanity made him unforgettable. Now, the question turns to you. When you think of Lee Marvin, what resonates most deeply? Do you see him as the soldier who gave his youth to the battlefields of the Pacific? Or as the actor who redefined toughness on screen, leaving a legacy of grit and authenticity that continues to inspire? His life, like his films, invites interpretation. Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Was Marvin, to you, more of a Hollywood icon, or more of a Marine forever marked by war? Your perspective matters, because in remembering him, we also reflect on the ways we define heroism, masculinity, and legacy. And if this journey through the hidden story of Lee Marvin has struck a chord with you, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the notification bell. Here, we go beyond the red carpets and silver screens, uncovering the untold stories of Hollywood's most fascinating stars. The triumphs they celebrated, the struggles they endured, and the truths they carried with them to the very end. Because behind every famous face lies a story worth telling. And behind every story lies a human being, as flawed, fragile, and extraordinary as any of us.